quite stealthy music. I feel like I need to be in a shark suit or something. My name's Nathalie. It's a pleasure to be back here with you all. For the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to be speaking with you about how to use the big 5 personality traits for smart personalization. And the idea with all of this stuff, it should be hopefully quite fun. There's a lot of information. I'll make the PDF available for you afterwards, because there's a list of resources at the back that you can try out and have fun with. So don't feel like you need to write down loads of notes. Before I start, though, I want to share with you one of my favorite spots in the whole of London. This little place is called Duck Soup. It's a really tiny, teeny restaurant wedged between other tiny, teeny restaurants in the back streets of Soho. It's really, really crowded. The wine is expensive. There's not much room. Sometimes you can't even get a seat. So why is it one of my favorite spots? If I'd found it online through the website, I probably would never have gone. It's a fairly unremarkable website. If I'd have gone to a ratings and review site like TripAdvisor, or maybe Yelp, 3.5 stars, again, 3.5 stars, not particularly exciting images, I would probably have been discouraged from actually going. Oh, you want me to move it this way? Like that? Is that better for everyone? Yeah? Okay, thanks. So Duck Soup, if I'd have had a look at the website and different various online presences that it might have had, I wouldn't have gone. And yet it's one of my favorite places. Why? Because one of my dear friends, a friend of mine, Erin, who I've had a lot of fun nights out with, recommended that we go. We've had a lot of great dinners out together, lots of cocktail nights, and because there's a sense of familiarity and similarity between what we like, I didn't even think to check online before I went. I just rocked up and had a great night. And so all of this is to say that when it comes to really successful persuasion, persuasion rests on how much we like and trust the source. And if we're looking at how to get people to take specific actions, one of the principles that's most valuable to us is that of homophily, our love of the same, or our tendency to bond and associate with similar other people. I once got sort of picked up on this particular principle. I was at a conference in San Francisco called Mind the Product, a big conference, and I get quite nervous before events. And so when I finish my talk, I go off and have drinks with people. And a woman came up to me, and she said, "I've seen you do something around homophily quite a lot." And I was really curious. I was like, what do I do? She said, "The few times that I've seen you speak, as soon as you finish speaking, you go for drinks, I always see you chatting to small brunette women." I'm obviously quite small, I'm brunette. And it really reminded me of a piece of research that found that even if you find an insignificant similarity between two people, like a shared birthday or birth month, even something as small as that can increase this sense of homophily, of familiarity, and can be persuasive in establishing a bond. Crucially, when it comes to marketing, if you're using this principle, a homophilous source is much more likely to be perceived as credible and trustworthy and reliable, and the effectiveness of your communication or message is likely to be far greater if you can leverage this principle. So how do you leverage this principle? Well, I would suggest that you do it by understanding and mirroring your audience and by digging into the psychographics. So their motivations, their values, the personality traits are a great place to start. In fact, adapting personality traits, adapting messages to personality traits can be a great way of getting it to land in the right way with the right audience. So how do you do it? Well, this is where the Big 5 personality model comes in. Based on the work of W.D. Fisk in the late 1940s, 2 researchers, Costa and McRae, codified this way of understanding personality. Originally, this particular approach had something like 4,500 factors, which is a huge number of factors. And over time, it got reduced to around 35. And now the one that we tend to use, the Big 5, uses 5 key traits, each of which we're going to be digging into today. Now, hands up if you have actually taken any kind of personality test or quiz. Okay, that's most of the room. How many of you have tried this one? Very few of us. Okay. The ones that we tend to be most used to are things like the Myers-Briggs, the MBTI. I don't know, there's other ones that you can try that typically put you into a type. So it'll say you are an extrovert, or you are a negotiator, or I don't know, a judger, whatever it is. Now, the difficulty with these kinds of methods, apart from the methodological difficulties that it's difficult to replicate, the personality test later in terms of the same results, apart from those things, the problem with creating types is that you put people in boxes. And so when we're thinking about personality, a much more accurate measure to use is a trait-based measure in which you're looking at people in a much more rich way. So these big 5 traits, they come on a spectrum. So if you're high in extraversion or you're low in extraversion, which is also known as introversion, that will also map across with different traits that you might have, like openness, etc. So these are constellations of factors that can also change throughout your lifetime. So it's not fixed. So all of that in mind, I thought we would start with a Harry Potter themed quiz because it's fun and it's early in the morning and I'm from London and Harry Potter is great. So this is going to be interactive. So by show of hands, we're going to do a little personality test now. I want you to raise your hand if you are organized and dependable and self-disciplined, and if you prefer to plan and aim for achievement. If you're a planner, a strategizer, you like to get your shit in order, that's a lot of us. Okay, in marketing, this is good. You're the guys that get the stuff done, that makes sure that the marketing campaign goes out, and you're probably high in conscientiousness. So conscientiousness is one of the best predictors of positive life outcomes. So for things like being in a successful relationship, taking care of your health because you plan ahead. But if you know that you're low in conscientiousness, it's a useful piece of information to have because then you can use strategies to help you do better. Anyway, so high conscientious people are likely to have these following traits. They're likely to be tenacious, dependable, you can rely on them. They're going to be self-disciplined and motivated, cautious, making smart decisions but not fearful, and also quite decisive. So who do you think is one of the most conscientious characters in Harry Potter? Yes, Hermione, of course she is. She gets everything done. Without her, the whole world would fall apart. She's highly, highly conscientious. Okay, at the opposite end of the spectrum, you end up with people who are low in conscientiousness. So these are people who are less ambitious, a bit disorganized. They're going to prefer chaos and have a bit more of a frivolous aspect towards life. And they're going to be more impulsive in their behavior and decision-making. Who do you think is lower in conscientiousness? Kind of like a sidekick. Which one? Actually, yeah, Neville. Yes, Ronald Weasley. He's also one of, I love all the characters. This is my favorite character in this one too. Ronald Weasley. He's horrendously bad at anything remotely to do with conscientiousness, but he's brilliant and he comes out with these genius ideas and stuff. So there's a complementarity there. Okay, I'm glad that you're up for playing this game because it's really sad when people don't want to play. It makes me very upset. Okay, the second big 5 trait. I want you to raise your hand if you are energetic and positive and assertive and sociable, and if you seek stimulation in the company of others. So you're a bit of a party animal, or you like to be sociable with people. God, I hope there's a lot of you with this, because you're in marketing. So you're in the job of being exertive and sort of being around people. Okay, so if you are having your hand up for this one, the likelihood is that you score highly for extraversion. So extroverts tend to have these following traits. They tend to be very gregarious, so they like people, they're quite warm. Sensation-seeking, they like new experiences, they're quite optimistic, and people describe them as people persons, so someone who anyone can get on with. I've chosen another, well, yeah. Okay, who do you think is going to be in this camp? So extroverts, very extroverted. Did you say Donald Trump? Wow, yeah, sure. Thank God he's not in this. It would ruin the books. Fuck it, well, there we go. Okay, Donald Trump. Yeah, he's also incredibly narcissistic. But we don't actually, small like little digression. You've also got dark traits, like narcissism is one of them. Anyway, we can talk about that later. I don't want to derail. You totally thrown me now. Okay, so not Donald Trump. Someone who's actually in the Harry Potter stories. Extroverts. Anyone want to guess? Okay, so the Weasley brothers, they're hugely extroverted. Everything they do is to do with other people and making people laugh. Okay, so people who are at the opposite end of the spectrum, who are much more introverted, tend to have these sorts of traits. So they tend to be more reserved and thoughtful, quite quiet and silent sometimes, often misunderstood. They get very easily absorbed into the tasks that they're engaged in, and they're often quite fantasy prone. Friends of mine who are highly introverted also, for some reason, seem to be very poetic. So I'm very fond of people who score highly for introversion. Who do you think matches these particular traits in Harry Potter? Yes, Luna. She's lovely. Completely in her own magical world, but absolutely wonderful. Okay, third trait. Put your hand up if you have a high degree of intellectual curiosity and creativity, and if you have a preference for novelty and variety. If you're one of the people that kind of figures out that there's some new event happening and you think it's off the wall and you think, oh my God, I'm going to do it, and your friends think you're nuts. If that sounds a bit like you, not that many. Okay, some of you, right. If you did have your hand up for this, chances are that you are high in openness. And people who are high in openness tend to have these following traits. You're likely to be more creative in your thinking, in the way that you perceive things, in the way that you approach problems. You're more novelty-seeking, you're the early adopters, you're intellectually more curious. You'll tend to be more imaginative and also quite adventurous. So open people are the ones that tend to do the things before everyone else catches up with them. I've chosen a slightly more obscure character from Harry Potter for the next one. Who do you think is massively open to the point where her brain would probably fall out if she was more open? I've given you a little hint. Is it one of the teachers? No? Dr. Trelawney. I love her. She's like, rah, totally open. Totally bonkers. Okay, so if you are at the opposite end of this spectrum, you're likely to be quite different to that. So you're likely to be a lot more traditional, conventional. See, this is, well, I wouldn't say this is necessarily Trump. But a lot of people who are very conservative in their views or actually have high religiosity fall into this towards this end of the spectrum. So people who are a lot more conservative and inflexible, they can often be quite authoritarian and very narrow in their thinking at the extreme end. Who do we think is authoritarian and inflexible, and actually she's a bit of a bitch? Would you what? No. Oh no, I like McGonagall. Umbridge. Yes, Umbridge. She's absolutely horrendous as a character. She's also extremely sadistic, which is not the same thing as as being low in openness. But she is one of these very authoritarian, brutal figures. And I hate her laugh. It's just horrendous. Oh. Right, so do you have, fourth trait, the tendency to be compassionate and cooperative rather than suspicious and antagonistic towards others? So if you're more of a lover than a fighter, if this sounds like you, okay, most of us. Now the thing to say here is that it's really useful to have people who are more lovers than fighters, but often the people who are the fighters, or I shouldn't really say it like that, people who are more assertive and don't care as much what other people think, they're also the ones that get to tell the hard truths. So it's good to have a mix in your teams. So if you are more of a lover than a fighter, you're more cooperative, more collaborative, chances are you'll score higher for agreeableness. People at this end of the spectrum tend to be very pleasant and harmonious. They're described as being affectionate and trusting by their friends, and they're emotionally quite responsive. So these are the people that when things go wrong, or you need a shoulder to cry on, or you want someone to help you with something, they're the ones that are likely to be there for you. Who do we think this is in Harry Potter? The most agreeable person you could possibly imagine. Do you think Harry, actually, well, he's quite agreeable. He's a bit kind of like standoffish in the corner, Harry Potter. Yeah, who said Hagrid? Yeah, brilliant, Hagrid, yeah. He is the most agreeable person. Not the sharpest tool in the box, but absolutely the most lovable. Yes, good job. Okay, at the other end of the spectrum, you have people who are much more cynical, highly competitive, aggressive, quite defensive of themselves. They can be extremely individualistic and quite ruthless. So people who are very low in agreeableness will often rub other people the wrong way. Who do we, I mean, there's a lot of characters to choose here from, but just pick one and hopefully it will match what I've got on my slide. Who do we think? Snape, Malfoy? Yes, any of these would be good answers. I've chosen this one. Of course, he's very mixed up and quite sad, but generally not that agreeable. Okay, so for this final fifth trait, there's no need to put your hand up. I just want you to kind of maybe think about what these particular qualities might be. And the fifth trait looks at our tendency to experience unpleasant emotions. So things like anxiety, fear, vulnerability, anger, depression, things that we all experience at times in our lives, especially if we've been through something very difficult. But this particular trait looks at the baseline level of these things in our life, so how often and how easily we experience these states. And this relates to the trait of emotional stability. It used to be called neuroticism, but no one likes to be thinking of themselves as neurotic, so they renamed it. People who are very emotional stable tend to have these sorts of characteristics. So they're the people who are going to be much more even-tempered and relaxed. In a crisis, they usually stay quite calm. They're pretty resilient, and they're fairly self-confident. So these sorts of people are going to be good in a panic. Who do we think is really good across most of these situations in Harry Potter? Yeah, Dumbledore, of course, stays calm and everything. So he's a good example of someone who's emotionally very stable. At the other end of the spectrum, you have people who actually suffer quite a lot from anxiety. They might be more hostile, feel vulnerable and self-conscious, and often experience dysphoric states such as anxiety and depression. It's actually one of my favorite characters. I'm not sure how many people will get it. Who do you think this might be? Someone who's emotionally kind of a little bit up and down, dysphoric, bit waily. The ghost in the bathroom, yes, Moaning Myrtle. She's fabulous. Absolutely brilliant. I love Moaning Myrtle. Okay, so now that you've got the basic traits, and hopefully you've got some way of thinking about them in terms of Harry Potter characters, I thought it would be fun to put this into practice. So, who do you think this following advert might appeal to? So we've got catching Pokemon in London just became much more awesome with this exciting new method. So things that are exciting, what kind of people are they likely to attract? I've got another couple of examples in case you're not sure. This is for deodorant. Degree extra fast, adventure, and then you've got sport defense, extreme, and my favorite bit, protection to push you to the limit. It's not a sports car. You put it under your armpit so you don't stink. But anyway, apparently it's really extreme, so watch it. Yeah, so who do you think these adverts are targeting? Adventure, excitement, extreme. It could be openness, yes, and there's a second trait as well. Okay, we're going to go with extraversion. Interestingly, the openness and extraversion have been researched by some as forming an extra macro trait known as plasticity, and the other three bunch into another one called stability. So you'll often find that traits cluster together in this way. So adverts that go for extroverts and open people, or people high in extraversion and openness, will often appeal to both of those groups instead of just one. So people who are high in extraversion have been found to respond to these sorts of words more than other people with lower traits. So strong, outgoing, active, excitement, attention. If you're using these words, you're more likely to resonate with a highly extroverted audience. Okay, what about these next ones? We've got experiment and surprise yourself with mobile A/B testing. And then another brand that I'm sure you're all familiar with, Apple, back in the day when they were the innovators. Who do you think would have been the people to try these sorts of things? It's new, it's innovative, it's quite creative. Kind of what the lady said down here a second ago. Openness again, yeah. So people who are high in openness are more likely to respond to these kinds of words. Things like innovation, intelligence, sophistication, imagination, creativity. People who are going to be the early adopters, if you use something like this in the body of your text, in the script in your videos, in emails, in content, they're more likely to pick up on these words and respond. Okay, which trait or states do you think these next products are targeting? We've got, again, deodorant, it's a bit of a theme today. We've got Nivea Stress Protect. These adverts are horrendous. There's something I need to tell you. Well, this one, we need to talk. That was never, ever, ever good, when you heard that. And I've also got a video that I want to quickly show you that also pertains to this particular trait or state. So I'm going to play it now, and then I'm going to ask you who you think they're targeting.
It feels as if we're all just splitting apart, and it's just really sad.
It's a lot to handle because it's my childhood home that I'm moving from.
I'm pretty anxious about finding my way around campus at my new school.
People might think that I'm weird. It took me a year to find one friend.
Good morning. So what we're going to do is let's write down the feelings that you might be having or other kids might be having about going to middle school.
You tend to fear the unknown, and none of us have been to middle school before.
It might feel kind of awkward because you're like the new kid and no one really knows you and you don't know them.
Yeah. Overjoyed, scared, weird, excited, skeptical, anxious.
It was a big surprise that we all felt the same and I wasn't just the one that was worried or scared.
You helped each other see that you're not alone in having these feelings. So this is a space to show people that you care about them, to help each other feel good even when you're apart.
Making these care packets really makes you feel relieved because there are so many feelings that you have that you don't know how to tell people.
Does anyone feel a little bit safer about going to middle school?
I feel better. I feel actually like I let all my feelings out.
When I thought I couldn't do something, you were there to help me.
I wanted you to know that I'm going to be right here and right here next year.
And you guys are like my sisters because I don't have a sister. I'm gonna miss you guys so much.
I felt like I was gonna cry. It feels amazing to not feel alone. Today made me feel completely different.
Okay. So which trait or state do you think those adverts were targeting? Yeah, anxiety, stress, fear, worry. So it's around emotional stability. If you're scoring low in emotional stability, or your audience scores low for emotional stability, there are certain words which were pulled out in that video that I thought was actually very well done, that you can use to engage these people more persuasively. So things like the word safety, anxiety, naming the thing that they're worried about, uncertainty, security, protection. So things around these anxious or dysphoric states, and then solutions to those states. Okay, I have another few for you. What about these particular listings? I'm going to go with something a little bit different. So we've got Hootsuite, the most popular social management tool. Who are the people? There's two sets of traits that relate to people who are much more sociable. Extraversion and, do you remember? I feel like I'm teaching you in a classroom. I'm really sorry to give you a test this early in the morning. So we've got agreeableness. People who are highly agreeable will tend to speak with more of these words in their text, and their writing on social channels, and also with each other. So they're using the words we and are a lot more often, as well as friends and family, words focused around communal, community goals, also home life, and strangely enough, numbers, so numbers lists. So if you're trying to engage people high in agreeableness, these sorts of words and this kind of theme in your language is going to be quite helpful. Here we have save time with this managing of multiple platforms. Who are going to be the people who want to be strategic, they're aiming for achievement, they're saving time, the Hermiones of this world? It's going to be conscientiousness. So people who are highly conscientious are more likely to respond to this kind of language. Things like goal, efficiency, strategy, sense of duty. They're likely to be targeted towards achievement, and crucially, because I actually rate quite highly in conscientiousness, appeals of guilt are going to be really effective for these people, which is probably why I got all my homework done, because my mum made me feel guilty when I was little. If you're trying to get someone to do something, guilt is going to be a good, strong motivator, although the ethics of that is really rather dubious. Okay. So specific words and themes engage specific traits. And if you want to design a persuasive campaign that's personality specific, you need to understand the motivations behind each of these. So I've created a grid. There's going to be 5 bits, so you can take a screenshot at the end and get all of them, to outline the traits and then the general thematic motivation for each one. So for people who are very open, they're going to be very drawn to creativity and intellectual stimulation. So what can you do in your campaigns to make them more creative, more engaging, more imaginative in terms of the content? If you're trying to go for people who are more conscientious, remember that's around efficiency and goal pursuit. For people who are more extroverted, excitement and social rewards are going to be really useful. So if you're running a campaign, you might think about creating a game that has like a peer leader board where you're matching people against each other and they're competing. That can be quite helpful. If you're going for people who are more agreeable, it's going to be a connection around relationships, so family and community, that's going to drive these people a lot more. And finally, low emotional stability. You're going to be looking at creating experiences that are revolving around safety and security, and reducing the anxiety and stress levels for that person. Okay. So to get you started, I've got 5 resources that you are all very welcome to check out. The first one, I know this is a very quick kind of like show of hands for the personality traits. If you actually want to do the proper test, this is the academic version of the test, you can do it at this site. It's based, it's on a university website, you can do that. You can also take a whole bunch of different tests on the Cambridge University website, discovermyprofile.com. If you want to look at how, I mean this is a bit more controversial, this area, how you can scrape Facebook likes to discover psychographic information about people, the one that's been used quite extensively, again from Cambridge University, is this one. So applyMagicSource.com. You can also do it from a wider range of digital platforms, so HoganX.com is good for this. And finally, this is really good, let me get out of your way, This is really good if you've got a large swathe of text, so 1,000 words or more. So if you're doing qualitative surveys where you've got an open box question where people can just write whatever they want, or you're getting reviews which are quite lengthy, putting it into computerized text analysis tools such as this one can be a really helpful way of discerning what the makeup is in terms of traits. It's important to remember with all of this stuff that you won't always find that your audience segments to be high in extroversion or low in openness or whatever it is. You'll often find clusters, so it can be quite difficult to tease these things apart. But if you are interested in segmentation and you have a large enough audience, it can be useful to run campaigns like Google AdWords or promoted tweets just to see if there are significant differences in terms of targeting specific traits. And if they are, you'll be able to use this in all of your content to optimize towards persuasion. I hope this has been helpful. Earlier this year, I released the second edition of my new book, which goes into more detail. You're welcome to check that out here. And I think now we have some time for your questions. So if you're a little bit shy, I know that there's an app that you can submit questions through. If you're not sure about questions, you can also tweet to me and I'll happily respond. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. You really start sitting there thinking, who am I? It's not so often we ask ourselves that question, who am I and what am I like? If you have any questions, it's okay to raise your hand. One question over there. Angelica, are you ready with the microphone maybe? Or just shout out and I'll repeat the question.
I'll shout out.
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible for a person to move between different stages?
Yeah, perhaps. Is it possible to move between different stages, perhaps in life or as lives evolve or something?
Let me ask you what you mean by stages. So that the 5 different traits, we all score somewhere for each of these traits. So you might be high in extroversion, high in openness, low in neuroticism. Is that what you're asking, or?
So if you were very prominent in one
yes.
specific category, do you think it's possible to move between those in life, or are you more inclined to stay with one prominent feature?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. That's a very interesting question.
Did everyone hear the question?
Should we repeat
yeah.
it?
Good.
Everyone heard it? Okay. Okay, so, I'll repeat it just to frame the answer. So the question was that if you're very highly prominent in one of these traits, let's use extroversion as an example, is it possible to then kind of move to a different one? So you might be highly extroverted and not very much of the others. That's kind of, yes. Okay. Yes, it's possible. I think the interesting thing about studying human behavior and humans in general is that there is, well, as many humans as there are, there's almost an infinite variety of constellations of these different factors together. So it is possible to find someone who's highly extroverted and then low on all of the other 4 traits. Typically, you'll find that people tend to kind of merge around the middle somewhere, so they'll be somewhere in the middle for extroversion, somewhere in the middle for openness. So you get a lot of grouping around like the bell curve in the center. Often you'll find that certain traits emerge together, so people who are highly extrovert are also likely to be high in openness. These things can also fluctuate over time. So for instance, if you're low in openness, studies have found that if you take magic mushrooms, so psilocybin, when they were legal back in the day, you could increase your openness levels over a longer period of time. And also there's a specific, what's the name of it? It's an amoeba called Toxoplasma gondii, I think, which you find in raw meat, which is why you shouldn't eat raw meats when you're pregnant, which a large swathe of the French population have, which also increases your openness and risk-taking over time. So these things are plastic. Also, mindfulness meditation has been found to change aspects of personality. So if you are low in emotional stability, mindfulness meditation techniques have been found to be extremely helpful for managing some of these dysphoric states. So yes, you find everything under the sun. You might find someone who's high in almost all of the traits and someone else who's low in all of them. It's really about where they sit on the spectrum.
Yeah.
Yeah, really interesting question. Thanks. Any more for any more?
There's a question up here.
Hi.
Angelica, yes, bring the microphone. Just, yeah.
Down on the front row, just
right
all the way
in
down
front
to
here,
the
front, second row, third row.
If you just, yeah.
Yeah, raise your hand so she can see you. There's the microphone.
Yes. Is it possible to have different personalities from when you're working and when you're in your other private life?
That's very interesting.
Are we always open, or can we be like open when we work and then introverts when we come home to our family?
That's a really interesting question. We tend to express different aspects of ourselves depending on the context. So say, for instance, I'll give you an example from my own personal life. So I have a few friends who are highly introverted males, low in emotional stability, who are extraordinary speakers and thinkers. If you saw them on stage, you would have no idea that they were introverts. I mean, there's no idea. You would just think that they were highly extroverted. So when they bring themselves to the stage, they expend all of this energy. They're very sociable. They're very stimulating and fun. And then as soon as they come off the stage, they need time to recuperate. So it's possible to express yourself in a way that seems as though it's one trait, such as extroversion, when actually your underlying propensity is towards needing time alone, towards being more thoughtful and reserved. And the same with things like agreeableness. So I think I score somewhere in the middle for agreeableness, or towards the lower end. I actually really, really like people, but I get fed up after a while. So I'm quite extroverted, like people quite a bit, but then I need some time where I'm just not around anyone at all. And if you ask my friends, I'd say, no, she's always sociable, but I actually have a lot of alone time. So what we bring to people depends on the context, and the way in which people interpret how we are depends on our relationship with them as well. So yes, it does depend on the context, what we bring out of ourselves.
And if we work in a team, for example, maybe there is one person who's very extrovert. Is it then common that other people take other kind of roles in the...
Yeah, you do
find... maybe there isn't room for 5 extroverts in the team.
Yeah, I often find that does seem to be the case. And if you're working in, some interesting work around constellations and how people fall into certain roles.
Yeah.
And so if, say, for instance, you have someone who, I'm just sort of hypothesizing here, you might want to go check this out, but I imagine that if you had someone who is high in extroversion and low in agreeableness, and they don't care that much what people think, but they want to socialize, they might be more dominant. If you had someone who is more conscientious, more agreeable, and extrovert, they might self-moderate in order to make space for other people.
Yeah.
But you would have to look at the research. But yes, absolutely, we embody different roles depending on what's available to us.
Yeah. Do you have any questions, Mats? Do you have any questions?
Yes, from the audience. If you work on a global market, are there cultural differences, or can you still use these models?
Great question. Yes. There's a couple of researchers that have done some really fantastic work on cultural differences. The one that's done it's about 40 years worth plus of work, Hofstede, based in the Netherlands, and Fons Trompenaars, who's also done some interesting cultural research, also based in the Netherlands. You find that at a cultural level, people respond quite differently. So, for instance, one of the traits that they talk about is uncertainty avoidance. So, some countries like, let's say, I think probably the US is a good example, is fairly okay with ambiguity and uncertainty. I'm pretty sure this is the results. Anyway, if you get a country that's happy to be uncomfortable, they're more likely to take risks, they're more likely to innovate, they're more likely to be open, so it kind of relates to the trait of openness and risk-taking and novelty. People who are from cultures that are uncertainty avoidant are much more likely to not take risks and to create rigid structures, whether they're religious, political, whatever, in order to create a sense of structure and security, which one could map potentially relating to emotional stability. So there are traits at the cultural level. The interesting thing with the Big Five is that the research that has been done around it has looked not only at the language that we use across different languages, but also behaviors that we express. And it seems to be that you can find these 5 stable structures across cultures and across time, gender, ethnicity. So yeah, you've got the cultural mapping, the individual mapping, and the contextual as well. So yeah.
How aware are we of what kind of personality we have in general, do you think?
That's a good question. All right, so let's just do a quick poll of the room. When we were going through those 5 different traits, I know it's sort of a fairly new model for most of us here, how many of you felt like you already knew what you were reading on the screen in terms of yourself? If you felt like there was a sense of recognition, like, yeah, I kind of know this. All right, and hands up if you were quite surprised that you were resonating with certain things on the screen. Not so many of us. So I'd say that most of us probably have quite an insight as to who we are or what preferences we have. I think when you codify it in this way, or you take a test, it can kind of be quite revealing in the sense that you might understand your personality in from a different perspective or in a different framework. I remember giving this talk, well, not this specific one, but I was talking about emotional stability and neuroticism. And a friend of mine suddenly realized that that's why he'd been having such a hard time. He was scoring low in emotional stability, and I mentioned the mindfulness app, Headspace. And he went away and tried it and was a power user and found it really helpful. And Headspace ended up getting in touch with him and wanting to do work with him because he'd found that he didn't realize that that's why he was suffering so much. So I think that sometimes it can give us insights that help us do better in life, better for ourselves. If we realize where we're excelling and where we want some support, it makes it easier to strategize around those things.
Any more questions from the audience?
Yes, another question from the audience. Can these traits be separated into external and internal, Outwards, I'm certain people rank me high in emotional stability, while I try my hardest to cover the fact that I'd rank myself low.
Okay, that's a complex question. Can you remind me the second bit again? Can you just repeat that bit?
Outwards, I'm certain people rank me high in emotional stability, while I try my hardest to cover the fact that I would rank myself low.
Yeah, I think, so that's a really interesting question. So I think that's where a lot of societal and cultural things come to bear. Some of the research that I was reading around personality found that in certain cultures, emotional stability was a bit more of a grey area. So if you're in a culture, for instance in the States, where we medicate for things like feeling anxiety or stress or depression, when actually there are a lot of social and cultural factors that can lend itself to that. So if you're in an environment where there aren't very strong social structures, or you're moving away from your family, you don't have that social protection, you're more likely to experience these states. It might not mean necessarily that you're low for emotional stability, but the context is creating that. So I think because these cultures expect us to always be happy and put on a good show, a lot of us will cover up the things that we feel other people don't want to see. When in fact, often, what you'll find is that the greatest healing comes when you're able to share this with appropriate other people that you trust. So yes, I think we do put on shows, especially with social media. I mean, when was the last time you posted anything that was vaguely negative, or when you had a spot on your face? We don't do that very much. And when we do, it's a statement. So yeah, we're encouraged to project certain personalities and certain personas, more so in some cultures than others, and it does vary according to culture.
Another question connected to the one, how aware are we? How aware and how much are marketeers and communicators using this kind of, do they really know that there are these kind of personalities, and are they really using
these sorts of techniques?
Yeah.
Yes. So how many of you have heard of Cambridge Analytica? Any of you? No, not so much? Okay. So back in 2012, the Cambridge research team that came up with Apply Magic Source did a really interesting study with Facebook, looking at likes and looking to see if you get enough information along with psychometric profiling, so personality tests, if they could extract simply from likes things like your sexual identity, so whether you are gay or straight or bi or fluid, whether you are likely to take drugs, whether your parents are divorced or together, whether you're likely to be of a specific ethnic background or a specific religious affiliation. And they used, I think it was something in the region of 58,000 people consensually. Now, according to academic sort of research, that was fine, that was ethical because it was consensual. However, they were then able to create a model that means that if you just scrape people's Facebook likes, you can then tell all this information about them. And this is stuff that you might not even tell your best friend. So, you know, a lot of things that you might hide from people in regular interactions was then freely available to the companies that had this model to scrape this information. That was back in 2012. That was 5 years ago. More recently, with the Trump campaign, Cambridge Analytica, which is, I think it was a UK-based company, or is it American-based? I forget. Anyway, there's some interesting documentaries that have come out around this, especially recently by Jamie Bartlett, if you want to look it up. Anyway, they managed to find out the psychographic profiles of their potential voters, and they were able to target these voters with specific messages designed to be more persuasive. So it's something which is being used extensively, which has been used extensively in marketing campaigns, in programmatic campaigns, and also in political campaigns. And the question, of course, is around ethics. We don't have a governing board of ethics for the way, well, at least not globally, for the ways in which we scrape and utilize people's data, especially this intimate personality and behavioral stuff. So it is being used. I question the extent of its, ethical application. But if, as a rule of thumb, if you're using these specific techniques and you're doing it for mutual benefit, that's when I think it's at its best. So that's what I always try and advise.
I think, was there a question? Did I see a hand? Yes, I did. A question on the third row. From here, Angelica. It's really hard to see with the lights on.
Hello. It's a question about marketing as well. I was thinking, what would you say the power of word compared to photos and videos? I myself think that I react more to pictures and films, and then I'm a little bit gullible that I don't react to words. And you're showing me phrases and deodorants and things, and maybe I'm just denying it.
Yeah, so the question is kind of how can you apply this on photos? And
well, is there studies that show that, you know, one thing is more powerful than the other?
Yes, so there's a lot of stuff to unpack there. It's a really, really interesting question. Typically, the way in which we have become accustomed to consuming content online has become primarily visual. So if you look at the platforms that we now use above all, I mean, even Twitter, the way that they've transferred things, all social media platforms now enable auto-playing videos that tend to be quite short, GIFs, images. So yes, we are principally likely to look at images and things that are moving, whether in our environment or online, because that information is immediate to process. It's a lot easier to process. It requires less mental effort, so it's less cognitive load. So if you're using images, there's some interesting studies that have been done around, I think it was principally around Instagram, around how you can tell if someone's more introverted or extroverted based on the images that they post. I think it was something along the lines of, if you're someone who scores high for introversion, you'll take far fewer selfies, something like this. But then again, it's contextual. So if you're someone, typically if you're a female and you're public facing, well, I hardly ever take any pictures of myself. Occasionally I do at events like this, but you'll find that women will often self-moderate because of the abuse that they often get. So it can be also a social and cultural response. But you do find that there are personality differences in terms of what people respond to. People who are high in the need for cognition, which is another trait that is not something we've touched on today, are more likely to do the heavy research and read the articles. People who are high in conscientiousness are also more likely to go into the details and read long-form articles as well. The thing I would say around using these traits in videos, especially around things like YouTube, or if you're using auto-playing videos where there are subtitles, which is across most platforms now, is that in the first few lines of that text, when you've got that person's attention, that's where you can front-load your psychological keywords to see if it makes a difference. Because often when we watch video, it'll be silent, we'll read the subtitle first, and then we'll decide whether to put the sound on. So that's at times like that when it can be really helpful. And also for the words that people actually speak during videos. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers your question. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any more questions? I see you in the back, so if you have any questions down there in the back, just wave to me. Okay, can't see any hands right now. Are there any more questions from the app?
Yes, one more. There can obviously be a difference between what role we have in a team and the traits types we are strong or weak within. Though too big of a gap between a role and my type, does it highly affect my level of comfort in the team, right? Kind of a complicated question.
Okay, I'm going to need to hear that again.
There can obviously be a difference between what role we have in a team and the traits we are strong or weak within.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can too big of a gap between a role and my type affect my level of comfort in the team?
Yeah, can the gap be too big between who I am, who I really am, and the role I play in my team?
Yes, I think absolutely. I think for people who work hard at fitting a specific role or fitting in socially and culturally, and again, this depends on the culture. If you have high conformist cultures like Japan and China, it's something which is socially and culturally expected. So I imagine that people establish techniques for being able to do that. I think if you're in a more individualistic society, such as much of Western Europe and the States and Canada, a large discrepancy between the role that you're invited to inhabit in the team and your actual natural personality is going to be something which most of us wouldn't be able to sustain or wouldn't be willing to sustain for that long, because you have a belief that we should be able to express ourselves more freely. So I think it comes down to how much of a gap there is, and then how much culture will either condemn or allow you to move away from that role in a pursuit of expressing yourself more fully. So I think that that's strongly culturally mediated. Yeah, it can be quite tricky.
You showed some examples with the deodorants, but I was thinking, could it be too obvious, you know, that, oh, this marketing is aiming me as an extrovert person?
Yeah.
Or
I think most of us don't really think about what we're served online. I think that's one of the biggest difficulties. Like, you know, when we talk about images and videos, I know about these traits. I don't apply that same conscious thinking when I'm consuming content. If it's something that I've noticed is really persuasive, then I might dissect it. But most of the time, we're just responding to things because we have a need to be or desire to be stimulated or to be relieved of a dysphoric state. We're going online because we're bored or we want an excitement. And so we don't engage. Most of the time, I'd argue that we don't engage consciously and deliberately with what we're consuming. We kind of just want the hit or the sense of satisfaction. So I'd say that, you know, most of the time we don't necessarily become aware that a specific thing is being targeted to us in this particular way. Yeah.
And that goes pretty much for a lot of marketing, right?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
Even if you're an expert in marketing, unless you're switched on and looking for these things and it's really obvious, you're probably not going to be looking for it and you won't see it.
Yeah. And when you do different campaigns, should you then, like, in this part of the campaign, I'm targeting people who are open, and in this part, or could you just mix it up in the same campaign?
You could probably mix it up. I think if you're doing something which is a lot more socially engaged, so you're doing a social campaign, you could maybe try 3 variants which are very distinct.
Yeah.
So one which uses extraversion and openness as a macro trait, and then you could do one for people who are conscientious, maybe one for people who are highly agreeable, and run them on different platforms, and see what you get back. I think it's a nice way to start seeing if there are differences on the whole in your audience.
Yeah.
And often you'll find that there are. So for instance, Red Bull is a great example of this. The kind of stuff that they do with their events where they're flying off cliffs with these, have you seen these, like with the things that they build and the cars and stuff? They're going for people who are high in extraversion and openness. Yeah. So obviously the language that they use is going to be stuff directed at this particular audience.
Yeah.
So in those instances is extremely useful. And in other, you tend to find that these clusters can be quite a helpful way of specifying which segment you want to target. And you can run them concurrently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Any last question?
Good.
Good. So many good questions.
Thank you.
Big thank you to Nathalie Nahai.
Thanks very much.
Nice
Thank
having
you
you at Webbdagarna. Thank you.